That's not a comic book. Now that's a comic book.
We're talking about Sandman again. Oh my god, Sandman. Sandman. I'm gonna start a new take, though, just to give myself proper time to talk about Sandman. So, I made the point the last time I talked about Sandman that I thought it was proper literature and it deserved a place in the canon. And I've often talked about being annoyed that, when you say something and you think it's genius and you think that there's no one else who said it better than you or made the same point as you, and then you find out someone not only made the same point, made it better, and of course, on the back inside cover of this book, if this isn't literature, nothing is. Damn it, people, stop it. Let me have all the original ideas. So this is volume 7 of the collected library collected edition, right? Fully remastered edition. There we go. This is volume 7 of that, and it's really good. This is the Brief Lives story arc, and since there was literally one issue missing between the Absolute collections and where to start on the remastered collections, I had to go read Sandman issue number 40. So that was, kind of annoying. But anyway, that issue is really good on its own, but it is entirely a standalone issue, so I'm not really going to talk about it here because I read it, over a week ago now. This book's just about, the title Brief Lives kind of gives it away in a sense. I'll talk about the plot of it before I talk about the implications, though. So in this, Delirium and Dream, brothers and sisters, are our main characters, and they're going on a quest or a journey to find their brother Destruction, who we're told 300 years ago abandoned his post, and just left his realm to do its own thing. He didn't oversee it, didn't help it at all, and he told his family that he didn't want them to seek him out or anything. And that's really interesting. The idea of Destruction not wanting to destroy anymore, not wanting to be involved in it, and he keeps saying because there's never just one side to a coin. And so, that gets into the thematics of what this book is about, and like I said, the title gives it away, Brief Lives. It's the idea that everything has a brief life. Everything has some kind of mortality. Possibly even death. You have that great issue that I talked about with the Metamorpho Girl in Volume 2 of Absolute Sandman. And Death has that line where she's like, I was there before the first living thing. I was there right before the first living thing, and I'll be there at the end when the last living thing perishes. And then I'll lock the door and walk away. And that's really interesting, but in this we get the sense that they can't be sure that's what's going to happen. The Endless, with the exception of Destiny, don't know all of what the universe will be and such. So Dream doesn't know if any of them are going to live literally forever. Eventually, Eventually, the Endless 2 will die. And that's the point that his brother's making. There's never just one side of a coin. They may fill these mythic roles, these higher-than-life kinds of roles, but eventually, too, their purpose will end. In this, we see gods kind of, scraping by, these long-forgotten gods. We see a goddess who is this temple goddess of love who's now become a stripper because that's the only way she can get tributes of admiration for her beauty and her sexuality. And we see this other god who, his prayers and his sacrifices were dwindling when he knew Morpheus, so Morpheus suggested to become a patron of travel, because someone will always need to be able to travel. And so he took up that position so he wouldn't fade the way gods do. That's what gods do. They fade. They don't die. They fade away slowly. When people stop talking about them is when they go away. And so in this, we see gods die, we see mortals die, we see, there's this great scene with this guy who's apparently lived for like 15,000 years, and he just gets crushed by a building, of all things. He just dies underneath a brick building. And he has this line with death where he says, okay, let me find it. I'm not even hurt, blah, blah. Well, that's one way of putting it, but your body is under there. No, please, no, not after all this time. I mean, a stupid accident. But I did okay, didn't I? I mean, I got, 15,000 years? That's pretty good, isn't it? I lived a pretty long time. And Death tells him, you lived what everybody gets, Bernie. You got a lifetime. No more, no less. You got a lifetime. I really like that. There's a finality to it. It's like everyone gets this. No matter if you're a god or a mortal or anything. Everything is mortal. Everything is finite. Even death, it is possible, is finite, which is weird. This is so fucking meta. And so Morpheus visits a god who is also dwindling, and that they talk on this as well. It's a Egyptian cat goddess. And, okay. Her ears prick forward. Someone is praying to her. A young human female whose cat companion was recently hit by a car. The cat is beyond recovery, and Bast, who is the name of the goddess, Bast sends it an easy death. The effort tires her. She remembers when the prayers and offerings swarmed around her at all times, uncountable, when she would pick and choose between them, selecting prayers on merit or on a whim, accepting or rejecting offers. She is beginning to be scared of dreams. Bast is getting old. She was a goddess. She ruled for hundreds or thousands of years in the kingdom of Egypt. She was, this immortal being to be feared and respected and worshipped. And now, occasionally someone might pray to her, and it takes effort to grant them their prayer. That's fascinating. The idea that the gods too wear thin, that they don't always stand up to the test of time. And what's so interesting about this is, in a book that's so much about mortality, even for things that we've been told are immortal, even though the book is about those concepts of life and death, death is not really in it. Obviously she is. I just read a scene with her, and she pops up, I think, she pops up one other time in the book, and then we get kind of a fake-out moment with her. Otherwise I think she might have a brief cameo. She pops up 3 full times, and then we get a brief mention of her. She pops up a number of times in the book, but she's not an important character in this book. She's not actively doing anything, and she doesn't have a lot of talking that she does in this book. She's there, she fulfills her role a couple times, but ultimately the book isn't about her. And that's weird, to have a story about mortality that has very little to do with death. I really like that. Death, the character. I really like that. And so ultimately at the end of this book we get, this is more or less bookend by the character of Orpheus, who we saw, previously in Volume 2 with Lady Joanna Constantine, and, this whole thing with the French Revolution. And so we get this sense of, making your own decisions within your life and letting that be the end of your life and stuff. So Orpheus's head has been basically sitting in this temple in Greece for hundreds of years. It was stolen once during the era of the French Revolution, and they didn't get it back for 30 years, but they got it back, and he's been back that whole time. And Morpheus has been avoiding him. And we find out that, just real quick, let me summarize. The story of Orpheus, for those that don't know it. Orpheus, in Greek mythology, had the most beautiful voice ever. He had a voice that was so beautiful that no matter what you were doing, you had to stop and listen to it, because it was intoxicating, it was thrilling, it was the most beautiful voice ever. And due to a tragedy of his wife, like, I think stepped on a snake or something and got bit. It was like, just a nothing death, if I remember correctly. His wife died and went to the underworld, and Destruction, in this, where we find out Destruction urged Orpheus to go see death, to go seek out death in the underworld, and convince death to give him his wife back. And it doesn't get fully explained in this, which is fine, because part of what's great about Sandman is it borrows from the canon in the same way that the other canon borrows from itself. And what I mean by that is, you read Dante or a bunch of Greek myth or Bible stuff, it's all referencing itself. It's all very internally connected, and Shakespeare's in there too. He has a lot of references to, the old myths and stuff. And Gaiman's very much borrowing on that same thing. So, in the original story of Orpheus, he goes down to the underworld and he sings his song, or sometimes plays a flute or whatever. He sings down in the underworld to get past all the guards and all the levels and have an audience with Hades. And his singing is so beautiful it even convinces Hades himself to allow Orpheus to leave with his wife, but on one condition. He may leave with her, but she must walk behind him, and he is not allowed to look at her until they are out of the underworld. And Orpheus is very suspicious of this, and so as he's almost out of the underworld, but before he leaves, so he doesn't have to go back just in case he's been tricked, before he leaves, he cannot help but turn to look to make sure that his wife is behind him. And the second he looks, she is snatched away back to the underworld, because he'd broken his agreement. And it's shortly after this, because he's so mournful, he's so sad, that Orpheus is torn apart by harpies. I think they call them something else in this. It's probably just another name for him. So he's ripped apart, and his head is thrown into a river that grants it immortality or something. It seems it's hard to tell. And so Morpheus has decided that Orpheus, since his head is alive, that he'll keep him protected because he's his son. But we see this dialogue shortly after Orpheus's wife had died, before he went to the underworld. Oh, where's that? Come on. We see this dialogue between them, and Morpheus says, "You should have gone to her funeral. Why? To say goodbye. I have not yet said goodbye to Eurydice, whatever her name is. You should. You are mortal. It is the mortal way. You attend the funeral, you bid the dead farewell, you grieve, then you continue with your life. And at times the fact of her absence will hit you like a blow to the chest, and you will weep, but this will happen less and less as time goes on. She is dead, you are alive, so live." And at the end of the book, or toward the end of the book rather, before this scene even, Morpheus grants Orpheus what he's wanted for thousands of years: death. Morpheus kills his own son at his bequest. He kept him alive, and he hadn't contacted him in thousands of years because he could not bear the idea of his son asking him to kill him. But circumstances of finding his brother required that they go see Orpheus, and Orpheus told him where his brother was, and Morpheus promised to come back, and he did, and his son asked for what he'd always wanted for thousands of years, which is a quick death. So, Morpheus, once he gets back to the dreaming, reflects upon this memory of this conversation he had with him, and he says, "So live," and then he's tortured because that he had to kill his own son, and he never really understood the pain that mortals deal with a lot of times. Like in the beginning of this book, so at the beginning of the book, Morpheus had been moping around because, he was left by a woman that he loved, and he'd been making the dreaming rain for 2 weeks straight. And all the servants kind of, talk about how he always takes everything so seriously and gets so mopey and lets himself get wrapped up in it. And then he goes with delirium on this journey as a distraction for himself. And at the end of this, he's ready to go back to work in the dreaming and everything. He's not gonna be all mopey like he was. And his brother has insisted that he has changed over the years. And Morpheus says he'll go back to his work tomorrow, but for the day he's going to just retire into his chambers. And he washes his hands of the blood of his son, and remembers that, and has that line, "At times the fact of her absence will hit you like a blow to the chest, and you will weep, but this will happen less and less as time goes on. She is dead, you are alive, so live. So live." And that's all he has left, is the memory of his son. He gets to just live with that now. And it is this perfect circle of what mortality is, what change is. And that's great. There's another great line in here too. Once they get on the road, where's it at? Once they get on the road, for a whole chapter, Delirium has been asking if there are words for things that there are not words for. Like these really complex, thoughts that just words don't exist for, and I find that really interesting. And then she says, "What's the name of the word for things not being the same always? I'm sure there is one, isn't there? There must be a word for it, the thing that lets you know that time is happening. Is there a word?" And this driver says, "Beats me." And Morpheus says, "Change." She says, "Oh, I was afraid of that." This is about the marching of time, the impermanence of things. Even when something seems like it's going to be there forever, it's not. Everything has an expiration date. Everything dies. Even gods die. And that's fascinating when you think about it. Like I'm sure someone watching this never knew who Orpheus was until I told that story about him a minute ago. I'm sure there's someone here that's watched all the way through the video, even though you haven't read this, and you never knew who Orpheus was, yet, thousands of years ago, people thought about Orpheus constantly. He wasn't a god or anything, but there was the myth of Orpheus. It was this amazing Greek story that had been told for generations, and you didn't know about it. It faded into obscurity in most circles, and I think that really makes the point. That makes the point that gods are not permanent, just as much as mortals are, just as much as bugs are not permanent. And I find that so beautifully fascinating and so well handled, and the idea that gods can feel too. And I'm an atheist, but I really do find something poignant in that these mythic figures that we as people create are, by their very nature of being created by people, impermanent. They seem like they're going to last forever, but they won't. Just like you. Everything has an expiration date. There's also just a little thing in this that I really liked. Delirium's written just absolutely adorably. She's so much fun. She's like this drugged out teenager, um, and she's such a sweetheart. Neil Gaiman is so good at writing sweethearts in his books. But there's just this one moment in this, and it's not even a character related thing. It's how something is credited. Um, like every chapter they open up and they credit who did what and like, who the artist is and everything. It's comic books, they always do that. But instead of written by Neil Gaiman, they have just words by Neil Gaiman. Pencils by blah blah blah. I thought that was pretty funny. Jill Thompson did pencils and Neil Gaiman did words. That was pretty good. But yeah, really, really great book. Every time I read Sandman, I fall in love with it more and more. If you've never read Sandman and you're a fan of comic books, even if it doesn't really seem like your thing, just give it a shot. I mean, it's not action-driven, but it has some, cool horror elements from time to time. So even if you're not a literary, high-minded thing, you don't have to enjoy it just on that level. There is other stuff here that I really do feel makes it worthwhile to read. I immediately gravitate toward the philosophical underpinnings of it and the literary references within it. So I absolutely adore it for that reason. But there is other stuff to be enjoyed. It can just be enjoyed on the surface level of crazy, mysterious things, too. So
That's not a comic book. Now that's a comic book.